Good evening, all. I'm Pradeshni Vijay Kumar, Policy Assistant in Central Zoo Authority, and it's my privilege to start the inaugural section of CZA Talks, which is ECHO, stands for Education for Conservation, Habitat, and Outreach. I extend a warm welcome to all the students, researchers, wildlife enthusiasts, and participants joining us on the occasion of International Tiger Day. International Tiger Day reminds us of our shared responsibility to conserve one of the world's most iconic and endangered species. Tigers are not only symbols of strength and beauty, but also indicator of healthy forest and thriving ecosystem. I would like to welcome our member secretary, Dr. V. Clement Ben, and would like to ask Sir to give his welcome address.
Thank you, Priyadarshini. So, this is the first inaugural session for our webinar series that's named the ECHO-CZA Talks. So, ECHO, as already told by Priyadarshini, it's education for conservation, habitat, and outreach. We have been doing this exercise, maybe webinars on conservation and ex-situ conservation, to be specific, all these days, but this has not been institutionalized. So this is an attempt wherein this webinar series will be institutionalized, and that's on every Wednesday between 4 and 5 will be a session on any endangered species, maybe a mammal or maybe an avifauna and things like that. So today is the Global Tiger Day, and coincidentally, we are talking about tigers such, and we have none other than Dr. Ramesh Krishnamurthy, who has a sea of experience in tiger conservation for the past 3 decades in the country. He has worked in different tiger landscapes, and he has been supportive all these days to ministry's efforts. So I welcome him for the inaugural, being the inaugural speaker of this ECHO experience. We are also trying to reach to maximum people, at least to different stakeholders like school children, college going students, nature lovers, NGOs working for the conservation cause, and also eco clubs. So there are close to 10 lakh eco clubs in that country. We are trying to reach to them too. Maybe over time we'll further strengthen and add on many features in this particular exercise, and we have tried for live streaming of this webinar too. So I'll not take much time, and I wish the team all the success, and welcome Dr. Ramesh Krishnamurthy for the inaugural speech on tiger conservation in India. So over to you, Dr. Ramesh.
So thank you, sir, and good evening, everyone. First of all, I want to thank CZA, particularly the member secretary, for having me part of this important day. It's a privilege and honor to actually, as you said, it's an inaugural session of this the engagement with the different stakeholders. And I also see a lot of officers and other senior members from Forest Fraternity and Conservation Group. So good evening and welcome to this talk. So I think like Ben Sab said, I've been in this field for many years, mostly as a wildlife biologist, but I've been always discussing with him that, how zoos are as important as wilderness, because we often see zoo as another microcosm of wilderness, because it is a backup force. So rightly, I think the topic has also been kind of chosen by the CZA. I will try to do my bit and see how we can make this connection with the wild tiger conservation, and how zoo can be a major player in the conservation, because India being the leader in tiger conservation, I think zoo has a major play. I'll quickly share the PPT. Maybe if somebody can just confirm if it is visible. Is this visible?
Yeah, it's visible. Yeah.
Great. So beautiful title from CZA. It's Saving the Stripes and the role of zoos in tiger conservation. So as I said, for many people, when we talk about zoo, it often comes to our mind is a recreational site. I think many children, others, even as an adult, everybody look up to the zoo as a site where we can go and see, appreciate, even as a passionate. But I think it is one of the several roles that it plays. And it may not be very apparently clear to others. But in this presentation, I'll try to touch upon some of those big role that zoo is playing very specifically to tiger conservation. And when I say tiger conservation, which is a apex species, and this also relates to many other species. This is a snapshot, as you see here. Captive tigers, they are, when you talk about tigers, they are everywhere. And in fact, we have more captive tigers than the wild tigers, as you see here. And global tiger population, when we talk about, it runs into 10,000s, and you see estimated distribution of captive population across all the continents. It's, you can even pinpoint which country has got more. More importantly, when you put the captive tigers in India, so many of them are in the zoos, and unlike other countries, they also have private establishments. But India, now we started having a private establishment. But majority of those tiger that we currently have is in our zoos. And all these zoos actually is governed by Central Zoo Authority, many of you know. So I think that tigers are one of the most sought-after species, not as an ecological predator, or also as a charismatic species. So it is very obvious that many countries do have them. And the purpose may be different, but they are there, and the number is very, very many. Okay. So coming to this captive population, we can actually put them into three major categories. So one is the conservation breeding tigers. We have them, the tigers rescued from different places and meant for breeding. Other rescue tigers, orphan animals, injured animals, conflict animals, confiscated animals, they're also there. And there are animals obviously kept for the display education purpose, such as zoo, but then the zoo itself do have these two other components. Therefore, though zoo may be put as a one captive unit, but it does have option to have conservation breeding or rescue. So in terms of this relationship with tiger conservation, the zoos or the captive facility, I think, as I said in the beginning of the talk, zoos are a microcosm of other wild population. It is like creating one more population. So therefore, they help maintaining the genetic diversity. It does support veterinary and reproductive research. It helps train wildlife veterinarians, managers. Raising public awareness is building a larger constituency for conservation, and also provides lifelong care for animals which can live in a much more comfortable situations. So in terms of wild tigers, we know if you can just draw a parallel, and the wild tigers, we talk about habitat, prey, protection, some sort of connectivity, which often talks about genetic diversity and public participation, and providing some resilience capacity to them. As you know, that India's tiger recovery has been driven primarily by in-situ conservation. But releasing tigers also been, captive tigers also been supporting in-situ conservation. There are enough example in India that in-situ populations and ex-situ populations have a very strong linkages. They've been supporting each other. And I don't want to go into the details of this wild tiger, captive tiger, but if you look at the larger behavior, I think that's the size and the way we manage, that's the only difference. Otherwise, overall, the housing, the care, food provisioning, other support system, you can draw a lot of parallels. So that is how the linkages are very, very strong. And since tiger is our national animal and charismatic apex predator, I think we focusing on tiger conservation or providing this kind of perspective might be very helpful for the general audience who generally tend to think a zoo as only a area where people can go and see and appreciate, or maybe kind of create more awareness. So IUCN, the Conservation Planning Specialist Group, talks now this one plan approach. I think this is a game changer in the way we are practicing conservation, because the conservation requires integrating genetics, ecology, veterinary science, social science into a single cohesive strategy. So therefore, the wall between the captive and wild must dissolve. This is the statement that is coming from the IUCN Captive conservation planning specialist group. So this is not a captive breeding specialist group. We're talking about conservation planning specialist group, which takes into overall conservation under the Species Survival Commission. So while we talk about One Health as a separate agenda, but I think the one plan approach definitely brings focus back to zoo as to they have much larger role to play in a large conservation perspective than currently what we are aiming at. So zoos are safety nets. I think it's really matters. So despite we claim that we have large wilderness, a large wild population, which is increasing. If you take an example of tiger, the population was once a very big number in the country. It crashed, and with the, I would say coordinated effort or concentrated effort by the government of India, especially Minister of Environment, Forests, NTCA, Wildlife Institute, all other field officers, the population has been brought back. The recovery has been very amazing. You are actually seeing the very, very steady growth of population. Now we are into the next cycle, the sixth cycle, where we expect to probably have a much higher number. So while we have the recovery, as we know, they're still isolated populations. There are high level of human interfaces, disease risk still there, genetic bottlenecks are there. So we cannot simply think that no, tigers can be conserved only in the wilderness. So they do require support system. Therefore, the population that we can maintain in the zoo can provide the safety net system, which is really required. Because earlier we started talking about how many tigers we wanted to have them. That I think the question started changing drastically from how many tigers to now asking which system can keep population viable, connected, healthy, and socially accepted. This is also a very important question. When I say socially accepted, we cannot keep having too many tigers everywhere. We are seeing the trend, the recent past, in places where tigers were not, they are also there. Like, for example, you go to Ooty, other places, tigers are there, Coimbatore, tigers are there, many other places where tigers were not there, high altitude, tigers have been. So tigers are actually expanding everywhere, but there are actions that have been taken. Okay, we can capture them, we can translocate them. That is not the solution. So there will be always a requirements where the zoo and captive arrangements will be very helpful to keep them, because managing individual tiger is not about just individuals. It's about the whole population, the whole species. So therefore, the safety net still matters a lot. So coming to this modern paradigm shift in the way we looked at the zoo, because from the traditional managerial system, okay, now its shift is more from science-based, institutional prioritized. So in the past, we looked at the zoo as an exhibition, isolated institution, basically focused on public recreation, basic animal care, and collection-based management, maybe without broader ecological goal. Maybe some of us would have had this broader goal, but by and large, the reflections have been in the past on those exhibiting mode. But in the current, we're talking more from assurance. As I said, it's building some sort of a backup system. So while population is still there are small population, or we call them as model population, that continue to remain in a captive population as an assurance, maintaining genetically managed population through straight book or a strict demographic planning, which zoos does very well, I think, within whatever the population that I have. So one of the reasons that why this particular discussion must spill over and talk, because very often there is a reluctance or inertia to bring these two populations together, because of which both tend to suffer. Because you do have wild population where we need support, whereas even the captive population need some kind of enthused individuals from the wild. So this collaboration, coordination, not just as a managerial level and also the population level, is very much important. So therefore, in order to mention this assurance, the strategy which we are following now requires this strong interlinkages, not just in perception and in functional action. The future is integration, because global conservation network acting as a node for field research, because it's going to be changing the whole research and health paradigm, and focusing on even in situ the landscape recovery, because recovering tiger in a tiger reserve or a small population is not enough. We need to have them from a landscape prism. So for that, we have to have the whole demographic and genetic characters, for which we need to start bringing, or maybe making connection with ex situ to in situ. So I'll just go about some of these examples where you'll be able to understand why zoo matters a lot more than what we think in terms of tiger conservation. Because when you look at the global tiger population, I'll be talking about the taxonomy and the way we manage the population captivity, they all have very strong linkages between the captive to wild. So as you saw in the first slide, we have more tigers live in captivity than in the wild. However, the value varies dramatically depending on what objective which they are managed. If you look at the wild population, we have, close to 6,000, but mostly it's in situ ecological integrity and natural breeding purpose. That's how we have this wild population. But we may tend to ask the question to ourselves, the kind of area we decline, we have kind of declined about 90% the population, the range, and we're more than 90% and very small range currently have, but then they're also expanding, that we all know. But with that kind of population, what is going to be the future of the tiger conservation, we may tend to ask. So now there are accredited zoos that across the globe. So they're managing these populations, with the conservation breeding framework. But there are private and unaccredited population. I think they are a lot more, basically pets, roadside attractions. Many of them are highly hybrid populations. So we don't want to talk about this. I just wanted to give just for understanding purpose, because we don't even count the commercial tiger farms into this any of the zoo or management category, because these are something that we don't even tend to encourage. But then people need to know that these do exist, because they can be a problem if we don't deal with them with the strong conservation measures. So therefore, as a takeaway, the less than 10% captive populations actually belong to managed or stud book tracked programs. So therefore, there is a conservation issues here. So captive population, if it is not managed properly, it can actually contaminate or cause much more damage than what we can think of. So I think this is something very interesting for us, because most of the time when we talk about captive population, the wild population conservation, the question of the species, subspecies, we often talk about, whenever we do reintroduction or translocating animal from one place to other, we say whether this is a genetically viable population or genetically, or is this the same subspecies or different subspecies, all sorts of question comes up. I think IUCN kind of resolved it. This is a cat specialist group. It is not anybody just picked up and then started now kind of resolving this the subspecies question. So in 2017, I think there's a large number of people worked on this the genetic question and the morphology question, and therefore they came up with an idea that if you put this whole populations of tigers, they can be grouped into two broad groups. One is a continental tiger, which is the Panthera tigris tigris. Other one is Sunda tiger, Panthera tigris sundaica. So here the grouping is basically many of those lands which are in the mainlands, they're called the continental ones like Amur, Bengal, Indo-Chinese, Malay, and South China, Caspian. Whereas in the Sunda, it's mostly the islands group, the subspecies they were grouped into. So in terms of the zoo presence, in fact, if you look at the continental tiger, even our Bengal tiger, there are not many. Mostly they are the Amur or Malayan tiger is what is there in many accredited stud book. This is what the record says. But most captive Bengal tigers globally are kind of unmanaged or hybrid. So the very few populations we have, that was also very recently we have a lot of rescues or consciously trying to have them. So we do have those kind of situations. But coming to this Sunda Island, the most priority has been on Sumatran tigers, because that's the number that we have. And they're treated as a critical insurance because the population or the range size is also small. Therefore, this captive population of Sumatra tiger is a kind of as a critical insurance against this impending island extinction. So you can understand this value of this. Many of us who see the zoo from a very distance, we will be able to appreciate that the zoo has much more critical. In fact, I often used to feel and tell people, I think managing zoo requires much comprehensive understanding, both from the technical perspective and also its implication perspective, as compared to managing even wild populations. So there are, in terms of the subspecies globally, as I said, we have individuals, but even for Indo-Chinese or other South China tigers or our Bengal tiger, we don't have many, but mostly it's Siberian Amur, Sumatran tiger, and South China tiger, and Malay tiger. Indo-Chinese also, we need to really see it's a more of a localized regional stud book, because when you're trying to rebuild this population in many places, we don't seem to be having the populations. So I think there is still the scientific or management requirements across the globe to look at what sort of individuals we have in the captive environment. Therefore, we can classify and prioritize them for different purposes. So the unmanaged population, which is hybrid, I don't know what they may not provide a larger conservation focus. So in terms of the breakdown into the security program, you can see a large number of hybridization. So we have the 82% with hybridization. So managed population with Amur lineage only 10%, Sumatra is 60%, other pure managed Malayans only very small percentage we have. So this also shows that there is a strong requirement for all the zoos to revisit and look at what population we want to have them in the zoo, and then what is the main purpose to be able to differentiate between a display or awareness to conservation breeding or conservation support program. So coming to this very important role a zoo plays in tiger conservation, because tiger, as you know, it's a very secretive species, though we can study them while they come out, but a lot more details about the tiger is still not known. And since it is a carnivore, it is not something that you can easily handle physically or try to observe very closely. So zoo plays a major role to support the field biology, because the zoo act like a controlled environment in many ways. So one of the things that is very straight away comes into talking about behavioral studies. I think people who have done, even with so many years of research on tiger, the knowledge on the tiger behavior, the tiger energetics, tiger prey consumption, even the castrations, the carrying capacity is still very limited. So the only place where we can actually get into the details of all those things is the zoo or the captive population, because this is where you can do controlled validations, because we have equipment, we have a lot of telemetry equipment that's come up, very sophisticated equipment, very expensive equipment they have developed. But once you put on the animal, how to find out, because each individuals have different behavior, each individual's the energetics are different, each individual's the stress behavior is different. So to have them all, studied in wild population, it is not at all possible. Therefore, use zoo or captive population to actually work out the validation, start measuring them initially, looking at how it is. So when you have large number of individuals, we can look at the details and we can focus on very specific ones and map the very specific signature of individuals based on the way they walk, rest, hunt, feed, all possible behavioral exhibits we can measure in the captivity and then apply that. Okay, once you have them, you can start building algorithm or modeling based on which you can calculate. Even, for example, to study this, what sort of battery life I want. To study this kind of behavior, how do I need to plan? What size of the collar should be? What should be the belt? All this evolution. I mean, many of us who are wildlife biologists may not even aware of this. So whatever you're using in the wild, many experiments of what you're having them on your hand, this all came from the captive or zoo populations. So therefore, they very quietly, the zoos have played a very strong role in science and conservation. So therefore, in this, the zoo validation, because in terms of the hike in terms of acceleration, escape, play, injury, or collar effect, I think you would be able to validate visually in the zoo environment, whereas in the wild environment, it is not very possible. Therefore, it's very hard to calibrate and also come up with very predictable equipments or other analytics. So this is very much is a part of the role of the zoo in tiger conservation. And it's very important is you can predict because we often talk about this body, that energetics as a proxy to the way they live. Because for the free ranging animals, energy expenditure is very key, because I kind of recollect, when people talk about tigers roaming, it's a very quote they talk about, they say about tiger behavior. Tigers generally don't walk randomly in the forest. It's each step tiger makes, it's a calculated step, because tigers do not spend energy just like that. So because animal need to, it's a large bodied animal, so they don't consume food every day, so they have a strategy. So therefore, this whole energetics, it's very ingrained in their behavior, ingrained in their evolution. Therefore, whatever that you are studying, whatever you're trying to come up with, if you want to make a general interpretation of what the tiger is doing, what the tiger breeding is happening, how they're spending energy, you need this model that is developed. So whatever the collar, sophisticated collar that we use, they have sensors, they have GPS, mortality mode, and we have known behavior that is very much available in the zoo environment. Then you can translate it into field and then start developing the model. That is how people have been working on. It's come through. Other one is the carrying capacity. I think the nutritional ecology, very, very important in tiger conservation, which can only or mostly be supported by the zoo condition, because we talk about carrying capacity from multiple perspectives, because the numerical carrying capacity as to how many tigers can be kept in a zoo or kept in the wilderness. But ecology carrying capacity is a number that allows us to carry forward. That number of carrying capacity is calculated based on the kind of habitat is available, the kind of prey is available, the energy that is required to support this population, energy in the form of prey population. So this whole calculation is all depends on the metabolism, how this metabolism is not the same for each animal. It all varies. So this kind of calculation that needs to be worked into, because the digestibility varies with the population, with the individuals, with different sexes. And then you basically also look at the resting metabolic rates and field metabolic rates. All these rates, the trials can only be done. So in fact, many of these carrying capacity equation that you have for tiger population is also came from a captive and then the field trials. So this kind of tells us as to, I mean, I would say still there is a space for us to calculate the carrying capacity, because whatever the model that we used in the past is from coming from a very limited population from lion or other animals, but with the tiger we have much more space to do now. So it's in zoo, it's very easy for us to measure the intake, measure the, what is the undigestible output that you have. So based on which, what has been consumed, what has been ejected, and what sort of energy spent, and what is required. So all these biomass calculations is very much possible. So if anybody talks about a human-tiger conflict, when they say, I want to look at carrying capacity, the answer is not only in the wilderness, answer is also in the zoo. So I think you have to look at the very basic question from there, how individual tigers are feeding and how much they're spending, based on which, what is the number that a single area can support, taking also into account other ecology requirements, home range, mating behavior, etc. So just to support that and see this biomass assimilation efficiency of tiger is not 100%. So they consume, if it is a muzzle alone, it can be 92% is digestible. But if it is other organs, it's only 85%. So skin, it's 45%, and bone is 20%. If you have such variations, so then when animal is taking any prey, it is not exactly the prey volume can be converted into the volume of the prey or the food that tiger takes. So all this knowledge is only available from the zoo condition. It is not possible for us to measure in the wilderness unless you do so much experiments. But even there, it is much more harder to do. Okay. So this whole the scale metabolics related to the law, Kleber's law that we very famously talk about. So how body mass and metabolism is reaches. I think with the apex predator, there is a deviation in this general approach, because the way it is not, as I said earlier on, it is not what it eats, it is supported. Because in this case, the zoo-based research has been very, very precisely supporting how to calculate the coefficients as to how much of those model you can develop, because based on n number of animals that have been subjected to experiment and then calculated them. So as I said, the nutrition for a tiger is not like the per kg of meat equals to per kg of tiger supported. It is not like that. So in terms of the carrying capacity model that we generally work around, we often calculate how many tigers can be in this particular tiger reserve based on how many prey can be supported. But as you would have been hearing this talk, you would know that it is not as straightforward as everybody's thinking. I think it needs to go much deeper into the food intake and the energetics. So therefore, this food intake in terms of how much is eaten, how much is digested, not digested, what is the overall energy which is coming from each individuals, and then convert them into a wild model as a prey biomass model. So the prey biomass required to support a tiger comes from these elements, which can only be measured through a research here, not in wild. So I just wanted again use this opportunity to highlight to all the people audience and also officers and experts to understand. I think a time has come for us by choice or chance that the zoos in India have to actually reorient itself as a space for dealing with the human-tiger interface, and also the space for larger science. I was listening to during our Wildlife Society meeting, our Honorable Minister was actually telling very specifically to the Wildlife Institute to focus on very strong, deep research. I think it's not only in wilderness. I think the deep research also required in the zoo condition, which can go hand in hand. So other very, very important, because zoo management itself requires the veterinary and other physiological standards, but wild population also requires. Now increasingly we talk about healthy, defining healthy tigers, or even One Health as a concept has been promoted very heavily. I know Central Zoo Authority, many other institutions are taking leadership in this, but then One Health looks at the veterinary component and the physiology component much more strongly. Therefore, if at all we need to look at any reference details for many of those parameters, I think we cannot escape, but the zoo is the only areas where you can go and do all these experiments, because field veterinarians cannot assess wild tigers' health without established baselines. And even we know, I've been involved in some of this research related to the hormone. One of the first studies that happened on the stress hormone in Sariska tiger reserve, trying to understand why the translocated tigers in Sariska were not breeding as compared to the ones that were translocated Panna, they were breeding a lot. So the answer was to look at, are they going through any stress in the wild population? So now, as we started getting the research, we got to know that each individual tiger exhibit a different stress level. When I say stress level, I'm talking about threshold, beyond which it starts affecting its reproductive cycle. So the stress leads to reproductive outcome deficiencies. This is how we all understood. But then what we got to know was it is not as easy as you can think, because each individual, each situation, they actually reflect the threshold varies. So this something like whatever you're trying to do in the wild population, it remains largely an educated guess or with a certain comparative baseline. Now, in this case, if we have a very good captive population zoo or other establishment, I think it's much easier for us to do the trial and then come up with the threshold that can be used to support. So that can go from different biological zone or whatever the population that we can think of. So many of this, the biochemical parameters and those, whatever that we are trying to look at in the wild tigers, all the requirements are coming from the baseline from the zoo, because we can experiment all this in the zoo. For example, fasting state, capture, what kind of enzyme gets elevated, and when you do restrain, what happens, and all sorts of possible experiments that are possible here. And since it is controlled, it's like the risk to animal is also much, much less. So as I think this is coming to this though endocrine, it is not just also about stress. There's very, very interesting insight that comes from the zoo in terms of tiger breeding, because many of those tiger behavior breeding is governed by hormonal influences. So many of the time when people talk about, so human disturbances causing animal not to breed. So many of the time it's very common, and people ask, if that is a situation, how so many tigers are breeding in the zoo? Very naturally people ask. It's very simple. So this is where some very strong insight that came. Whether they are in zoo, whether they're in the wild environment, tigers do act normal, or tigers do breed well when they feel sense of security. So though a lot of people may go and see the tiger, when they feel a secure environment, they do breed. I think that's a big lesson that is coming from the zoo. So here, as I said, it's not only about the stress hormone, even other reproductive hormone experiments can be done. And that can allow us to understand what sort of optimal, whether the individual tigers are reproductive state, whether this, animals breeding also. Because currently, whatever we are looking at in the wild population, little more, I would say, population specific. Okay, there's a population that we are monitoring that is basically going and increasing or decreasing. That is a level, but the details of the physiological changes or other outputs are not still that level. I think there's a big space for this sort of research, and this research has a direct implication for conservation in the wild. So I think other experiments, which I don't have to highlight very much, I think many of you are aware. And if you want to look at anesthesia, because in wild environment, if you need to capture animal, particularly by tranquilizing chemical immobilization method, veterinarians would tell us, I think it's hats off to them that no, they have to actually apply their experience, apply the guesswork, apply many of them, because it's not something that's very straightforward. Now, with so much research that has happened in the captivities, calibrate, okay, if this animal is this size, what might be the body weight? If it is looking like this, what will be, if it is behavior, whether, what is the dose level that we need to provide? All sorts of calculations are possible through the captive populations. That is what the dosage is scaling, or what sort of reversal agent we need to apply, and what are the cardiopulmonary baseline when you're actually sedating this animal. Then I think many veterinarians will feel very confident to deal with wild animals. So I can see even today, there is big gap between the veterinary professionals who are dealing with animal husbandry and the wildlife. But I've seen many of them, as soon as they got experience into this wild, very quickly they've been able to become the wildlife experts, because the basic research, basic training that is available in the zoo or captive environment is actually helpful for them to quickly change into that situation. They're able to do. So now currently when you look at India, there are specialized, even places like Madhya Pradesh, they have specialized cadre of veterinary offices, and there many states do have them. And this experience, research, opportunities available in zoo is much more significant than what we have visualized now. I think it's only increasing the requirements are, because active population management is something that the government of India is taking very strongly. And now there are separate strategy for how to look at different populations and also try to repopulate the areas. So this involves physical capture, chemical capture. All these things require the baseline information or support system. And the disease is One Health. I think One Health we talked about now is important. Now it's coming up, because the linked concept of animal health, public health, environment health. So that is going to be the future. So which means that the zoos have a very, very important role to play, because the zoos, I mean, you can actually think of a zoo as another wild population with a high human interface. So people are coming, interacting much more. So which means that managing the captive population has a strong implication to human population in other wild population. So whether it is a disease, is a canine distemper disease, or whatever the disease that is emanating, so that can actually be put under surveillance. Similarly, there are many diseases that can be surveillance can be done, and if there's field trial and success examples that can be established, I think they are also going to be very useful in the field, because One Health now there's a lot of effort is going on into the zoonotic surveillance, setting up vaccine laboratories, many of them. So at the same time, it's also important to sensitize people as to what is the respectable limit that you should have it with the wild animals. So this also allows that sort of, and then also the new opportunity with the virtual experiences that zoo can create, so that people are able to have not just the animal, and they can also have animal in its natural environment. I think there's modernized arrangements of zoo setup would also be very helpful for people to appreciate, understand the animal behavior in the natural environment, or also from whatever the trial experiment that is available in the zoo, it can go to the wilderness. So I think zoo does have a strong base or the driver for One Earth agenda to be taken forward, because people are interacting much more, and you are able to sensitize people and you can take it forward. So coming to this other most important aspect of the zoo supporting tiger conservation, because they do preserve the evolutionary potential of tigers. Because we're talking about conservation per se. I mean, when you look at very deeply, what exactly the conservation of tiger is, or whatever we are doing to preserve them, is basically we're trying to preserve the evolutionary character of the animal. That is the whole purpose of conservation. So now the evolutionary character is also retained individual and the genetics. So when a population is maintained as a unique population, so you have, as we said earlier on, it's a genetic backup that is available. So when we talk about in a populations, we often say inbreeding. Okay, when same individual, same population breeding over and over, so they get into inbreeding coefficients. Obviously, that population is not going to be viable in the population. That is why we talk about, in the zoos or wild animals, while maintaining sufficient effective, we call them effective population size. Basically, it's mathematically critical to halt genetic drift or retain the fitness. So, which means it requires a permutation combination. Zoo is fantastic in doing this because individual population, when they manage, I think mean kinship index is looked at as, as a scientific mechanism to pair individuals. So animals with a low MK have fewer relatives. Therefore, they are used as a priority species for breeding and ensuring the captive population to retain 90 plus while founder stock. Basically, when we say keeping them 90 plus, means that the animal, the population that you have in zoo does have the wild character. So therefore, if this population kind of maintain, if there are any emergencies in the wild population, I think zoo can support. I think this inertia currently about captive population cannot go on, things like that. I think that will kind of get dissolved sooner or later because the situation is demanding that the flow from this captive to wild to captive is likely to happen. When it does in a much more organized and a scientific manner, I think it's going to benefit both and in general the species as a whole. Okay, therefore, when you look at the population census, we look at the individuals, and we also need to look at, because we need to move from, even with All India Tiger estimation, whatever we have, we are currently talking about the numerically how the population is doing, but in some cases we are also sampling the genetics just only for population estimation. But I think we are also getting this idea about which population is mixing, which population is unique. So that is kind of helping us to look at the effective population and then the gene diversity. Accordingly, we can look at how the population is growing numerically, or it also carrying along the evolutionary capacity. Why the pedigree, kinship, founder representation matters in zoo. So people who live with a zoo, they know that these do matter. So initially you might be thinking only to manage the captive population, but I think it's also important to retain the overall population viability in the captivity and also in the wild. So the genome, I think we talked about, even when people talked about cheetah earlier, we talked about preserving some of this cryopreservation and all those kind of research or discussions taking place. So I'm not expert on that. I would not be talking much, but I just wanted to only highlight that this space is still available. I think it might be just a matter of time that some of the scientists or managers will probably look at this option. I think particularly for artificial insemination, we are also looking at some of the other banking and all, but much more research space is available in these areas too. Okay, so as I said already, assisted reproductive technology has evolved much more, and currently it is used in captivity. But now, as you know, some of these examples that you see from Great Indian Bustard Project, many of this project, like we have Western Trachyplan Project, it's a bird-related program. We've been doing it for the mammalian program, but not in India, but outside the country. There have been a lot of efforts, but I think we also have now a situation. But I think in terms of artificial insemination, in vitro sterilization, these are also happening in India. It is not that India is lagging behind any of those efforts that being taken up. I think we have been doing very strongly. Maybe there are variation in different zoos, but when we start seeing the linkages with the wild, I would say many of these professionals who are dealing with the zoo would also see more sense of purpose for doing all this. It is not just about managing them. So all this maintaining sperm, future reproduction strategy, lineage preservation, genome archive, retrospective disease ecology, all these are being done. So this is just a picture that I just showed from Sayadri Tiger Reserve. Recently we translocated wild, but then I also want to highlight here. So in some of the reintroduction program, like be it in Panna or like Bandhavgarh, in Noradehi, many other places. So the orphaned, semi-wild, captive bred animals have also been used to support populations. So these are some of the things that generally helps us to understand that how the conservation discourse can be taken up. So just finalizing, just summing up, I just wanted to just quickly go through in Indian context. I think since India is a leading, I would say, leading country in terms of tiger agenda, because we have more than 70% of the wild population. We have well established the science-based system, population recovery. I think name anything related to tiger conservation, you will have best practices in India. Therefore, naturally, the global the range countries also look up to India as a leader in tiger conservation. And so we do have different strategy, because when you wanted to manage the zoo in tiger, like India, where particularly is guided by central zoo authority, so we can operate fundamentally different, because it can offer immediate mandate. Then Western countries' philosophy is completely different as compared to in India. In India, we have everything that's strongly connected to culture, management, or conservation. So when you look at some of the strategy vector like population, wild integration, breeding outputs, I think globally the objective has been different. But whereas in India, the focus, for example, if you can take the population scope, the global zoos focus on multiple species like Amur or Sumatra, because based on whatever they were able to get around. But in India, we are focusing on tiger, which is naturally zoo, because that's our species and we have to do. And maybe we need to screen them and see whether we have any mixes here and there. If it is, and we look at them, and then maybe start looking at the population, because we do have conservation breeding program tiger, but maybe this is an opportunity for us to review completely and see whether we can maintain a tiger population somewhere which resembles like a very small population of wild tigers, basically carrying those genetic diversity. So getting into wild integration, I think we talk more from daily, direct operation leads, because since zoos mostly managed in India, the management coming under the Ministry of Known Forest, I think the interaction has been with Forest Department, whereas with the global partners, they look at multiple funding agencies, because they are driven by funders or individual donors. And breeding output, because here is mostly the population control is happening, but in our case, conservation breeding, which is very strong, that we often use rescue, or it's also used as a holding facilities. So as I said, we have been using rescue and tri-stage basis and experiment and rehabilitation has been done, and holding. I think now we have established Center of Excellence for Human Wildlife Conflict, and I think zoos are going to be playing a major role in terms of managing interface population and also trying to repopulate. I think zoo can actually have much role from a holding individual exhibit research to dealing with the conflict and also reintroduction of species populations. Yeah. And as I said, often orphan rare tigers have been used. Many examples we have in India. We have used them, and rewilding process has been successful in some places. And they are playing a very strong support role, and infusing wild genetics, because wild founders are already there. As we keep talking about so much about the zoo being matter to wild conservation, but I think it's strongly linked, because we need to have the gene flow from the wild to captive also, because we need to keep adding the founders, and so that we can reverse the drift and keep, look at the stud book as a part of the strategy which is there, but start using the stud book and then having them added into this wild captive and wild populations. So there are classic examples where some of the examples where we talk about the tigers are being used in captivity. They've been successfully developed into individuals offering contributions. So we have some examples coming from Delhi Zoo and in Odisha and also Mysore. There are individual examples that there where tigers have been rescued, tigers have been used, and they also mated with others and starting a new captive population with infusing a genetic advantage. So finally, I think there's a lot of information action that is required, because zoo can really help advance our computer visioning and strategies, and it can look at conservation education. That's what you're doing. I think it's a fantastic effort. I compliment Central Zoo Authority and all those people involved. We have talked about increasingly, the more we engage with people is better. So because the zoo can actually build this larger constituency of conservation, because from awareness to building in the champions might be there. In fact, I wanted to request the member secretary, ECHO-CZA, also to use this opportunity to build student champions for a captive population or captive tigers, whatever, so that we can take the knowledge to higher level and build the capacity and to have the community support in large perspective. So the future of zoo science is going to be a precise management and conservation genomics and real-time data sharing, because next decade of tiger conservation will rely on even deeper integration of advanced technology within zoological institution. Therefore, when I say I'm talking about zoos and other captive populations, it definitely is going to be the much more. So just overall, we need to look at as a blueprint from the zoo function to tiger outcome. So because baseline bank and stud book, biologging laboratory, rescue register, education metrics, identity research, health, behavior, genetics, landscape strategies, social, all of them are actually is emanating from the zoo. So I think you would have appreciated so far in my talk how strongly, I mean, I'm talking very passionately. It is not that I've been given the talk I wanted to kind of link. I strongly feel and totally convinced that the zoos have much large role to play for tiger conservation than ever before. And because because it's a shared responsibility, because the modern zoos are highly calibrated scientific instruments through advanced physiological research, genetic custodianship, and frontline rescue operations. Zoos provide the critical empirical data and demographic safety nets required to secure the apex predator's future. So I'll end here by saying that saving the stripes requires the laboratory, the zoo, and the sanctuary and the jungle to work as one. So modern zoo, in terms of the take home, do not save tigers alone. They make wild conservation more measurable, safer, more ethical, and more publicly supported. Thank you so much, and thank you to CZA and Member Secretary for having me in this inaugural the webinar. And I'll stop here. If there is anything that I'll over to the organizer. You're muted. We can't hear you. No, can't. I don't know that others can hear.
Am I audible to all?
Now,
On behalf of Central Zoo Authority, I would like to thank our distinguished speaker, Dr. K. Ramesh, an internationally recognized conservation scientist and landscape ecologist. Over nearly 3 decades, Dr. Krishnamurthy has led several nationally significant conservation initiatives, including the reintroduction and recovery of tigers in Panna Tiger Reserve, conservation breeding of the western tracopans, landscape planning for large conservation landscape, climate change adaptation studies, and the application of remote sensing, GIS, drones, wireless sensor networks, and artificial intelligence in wildlife research and management. His work has substantially advanced science-based conservation planning and wildlife monitoring in India. I would like to thank you very much, sir, for such an inspiring and informative section on tigers. Your presentation has helped us understand not only the importance of conservation of tigers, but also the important role of zoos in conserving the tigers. We are truly grateful for your time and for sharing your valuable knowledge and experience with all of us today. I hope our young participants have learned something new and feel inspired to contribute towards wildlife conservation in their own way. We will now open the section for questions, and I would like to ask my dear participants, if you have any questions for Dr. Ramesh, this is your opportunity to ask. Hence, you may raise your hand or type your questions in the chat box, and we will be happy to assist to take up the questions one by one.
I think two people have raised. Earlier I saw. Yeah, Mr. Abhishek. Unmute and please ask. Is it locked from your side? I think I can see somebody, Mr. Abhishek. What is the...
Vipul sir, you can unmute yourself and you can question your question.
I think
Yes, good afternoon. This is Lambodar Upadhyay from Bokaro Steel Branch. We have got a zoo here. Though we do not have tigers, but one question I have in my mind, Dr. Krishnamurthy. First of all, I like to appreciate the presentation. You have given very good information about the tiger conservation and something we also do not know, but it's a good informative session. One thing I like to know that you showed that the captive tigers are less, and the tigers captivated by people, not by uncredited agencies. That is quite a huge number. I think compared to the tiger free in jungle or free and either in proper organized zoo and all. So what to do about this unorganized sector, which is not really, that is more threatening, I think, for the tigers. Their trafficking might be going on, and secondly, we may not make the proper count of the tiger. Also, the tiger count you are showing how correct it is, because it is not that much organized. What I feel.
True.
So, what is our step that should be and that is happening right now?
Yeah, I think, sir, you really mentioned a very important point. Unfortunately, it is not in India. Okay, so mostly what you see, it's outside the country, but this particular matter has been taken into consideration with all the global conservation effort. I think the crackdowns have started happening. I think some countries do have reservation, but many countries now coming on board. I think slowly, this aspect has been brought under. So we also recently read an article where Cambodia also had some, which we did not know. We were trying to rebuild a tiger population in Cambodia, but there are also tiger farms we got to know. But I think this is something that we probably look at much more international. So that is why we have Global Tiger Forum and IBCA now. So hopefully with more interaction and states taking different measures, this will come down. But the point is, I think it is, those populations are definitely is kind of risky. But as we start securing like what we're doing in India, if other countries also start doing, I think both ways, one side we also try to eliminate this aspect, other side we do. That is what we can do. But yeah, I will not be able to, I don't think that I've given you a very satisfied answer, because I don't even have that complete answer to that. Yeah.
Now, what I am saying is that suppose this tiger, whatever the tiger we found in this uncredited agency and that is been captured by them and that is being kept by them, we did not properly notice it. So why not should start a movement, because we have a lot of zoos where the number of tigers is not very high. Maybe there are some zoos where zoos are, you can say, national park where the number of tigers is less also. So at least one sort of handholding or something like that should be done in the initiative of CZA, so that these tigers can be transferred, they should be taken care of. So because once we say conserving tiger and we are not taking good care of those particular section where the huge number of tigers are there. So I think the conservation will be limited to whatever is being are in captive zoos and national park, and that is a quite a less number, quite less a number compared to those tigers which are not being managed properly.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. So I think it's like I said, India, it is not so much a problem. Therefore, we have not done it. I think like India being a lead country, it needs to be done. We cannot also just keep other side. So I think that effort is going on, but may not be the scale that you're saying. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to ask Ganesh Bansal, sir, to ask you a question. Can you unmute yourself, sir? Okay, let me read about his question. Sir, he have asked insightful presentation on thing. His question is like, does rewilding of tiger has any role in wildlife? Rewilding of tigers or wild animals from zoo to national park help in conservation?
Certainly, I think that is what I was saying earlier. We have been looking at so far in the wild population where rewilding is happening, because it's more from the perspective of providing this similar environment. If zoos can have such kind of opportunities set up, I don't see a reason why they cannot be. In fact, it may be in some situation it may be the future. Because looking at the space available, because there have been effort that even for the tiger conservation breeding to identify area within the zoo, but you also have to look at the perspective that we already have limited space, but occupying more space and then managing them in the wild, as opposed to we have other environment, exterior environment, if there's more areas available. I don't see a reason why it is not possible, but it all situation specific. It is not a general focus.
There is one more question that Is there any psychological impact of photography on tigers in zoo?
Depends how they're taking it. I don't think so. We have seen this as I think it's a part of the camera trap exercise. Many people often say that there are tigers, they are called trap shy, and there are tigers which are trap happy. So some tigers do feel comfortable taking photographs, some don't. So we cannot generalize. Of course, a responsible photograph is important. People, I mean, if they go and just flash it, any tigers will feel comfortable. But that is again, you would see that kind of experiment happening from zoo, then accordingly, I mean, in my answer is it depends, and some animals happy, some are not. I think there are many questions on the chat box. I'll probably quickly answer combining. So rewilding is basically a process where particularly we talked about orphan, because in the past, the captive population, actually the captive bred population have been rewilded. That is why the whole concept of soft release came up, because animals were bred totally inside a captive environment, then they have not, sorry. So they've been kept in some sort of semi-wild environment where they've been provided the opportunity for them to experience the area and develop the skills which are required to be living in the wild. So that is why this kind of concept, the rewilding, is again developing the wild behavior. So whether in a secluded zoo environment or in the wild environment, so this is possible. People have done it. It's proven, and it is now we have n number of examples in many species, but in tiger case we do have. So that is there, and breeding programs we do have, but I think as I said, we need to review them whole and look at the genetic structure and accordingly start developing. I mean, in my perspective, I would like to see multiple zoos like as a meta population. So the meta population tiger is one population. Then maybe in future, if there is a requirement, they can also become a source if it is. But for that interaction between the meta population, the zoo and wild needs to work simultaneously. So there has been, I think, the embryo research that's been done. I think probably CCMB will be able to answer. I don't have right information at the point. I think this is a different question about group breed that's about forest. I will not be able to answer that. Poachers are well armed, that's true. But I think things are changing. Things are changing, and things are changing now. And I think Forest Department is also increasingly equipped, and many states do have very strong support system.
Is there any other question from the participant side? No more questions. I would like to thank Dr. Ramesh for patiently answering all the questions and for making this section so engaging and insightful. I would also like to thank all the students, researchers, and enthusiasts who have participated in this section. Your curiosity and interest in wildlife conservation are truly encouraging. With this, we come to an end of today's CZA talk, Echo section, on the occasion of International Tiger Day. We hope today's discussion has inspired all of you to appreciate and protect our national animal and its habitat. Thank you all for your joining, and we look forward to seeing you again in our next CZA talk Echo section. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. All the best. Happy Tiger Day.
Happy Tiger Day, sir.